Animals is one of the best records Pink Floyd ever made. It's part of the Big Four, which includes The Dark Side of the Moon, Wish You Were Here, and the double LP The Wall. But among these giants, Animals sold the least amount of copies and had little in the way of radio-friendly singles. But then why is it for some fans their favorite record by Pink Floyd? On today's program, we're going to dive into the music, examine each track in order to understand what makes Animals so great. But before we do all that, be sure to hit subscribe if you haven't already. Thank you to those who already have. All right, let's get into the review. Now, in case you didn't already know, Animals is a concept album loosely based on the book Animal Farm. Bassist Roger Waters saw the human condition reduced to three types of animals: dogs, sheep, and pigs. The pigs are the uber-rich and lawmakers, with the dogs below them as the law enforcers and businessmen, and the rest, the lowest rung, are the sheep, the common folk just trying to get by. And so on this record, each song examines one of these animal classes and criticizes them, save for the song that opens and closes the album. Before I get into the music, I want to touch on the cover because I find it very important for setting up the album concept. Overall, it feels dystopian and bleak. We know this is the industrial part of a city, yet there's no sign of life anywhere. It's desolate, eerie even. The floating pig only adds to the unsettling nature of the cover. It almost feels like a mascot for a slaughterhouse. The building is Battersea Power Station, located in the west of London along the River Thames. Its 4 smokestacks are imposing. They could represent the 4 members of the band, but only 2 are producing smoke. Could this be in reference to Roger and guitarist David Gilmour, the only 2 credited songwriters on the record? Or is it more likely that this is because the station was already partially closed by the time the photo was taken? Either way, to me, the building looks like a dead animal with its legs up in the air. The black and white photography gracing the gatefold only further illustrates the bleakness and sadness found in the music. And so without hearing a single note, the cover does an incredible job of setting up the tone of the record for the listener. Moving on to the music, we have track 1, Pigs on a Wing Part 1. Now this song and Part 2 are not directly related to the animal concept, but serve to give the listeners some musical hope by bookending the album with a love song. Considering it was one of the last songs written for the album, I think it's one of Roger's best ideas because it eases us into the brutality of what's to come. Just the simplicity of Roger singing and playing an acoustic guitar really works here. It's gentle, inviting, heartfelt, and familiar. Lyrically, Roger is expressing how dull life would be without his love, especially with the line "zigzag our way through the boredom and pain." But it's the way he ends with a bit of foreboding by singing, "and watching for pigs on the wing." Truthfully, it's a bit confusing, but I see this as saying, watch out for the pigs of society, which to Roger are their overlords. Effectively, this song foreshadows the music that follows.
For pigs on the wing.
And with that, let's move on to the song Dogs, which at 17 minutes takes up the rest of side 1. The opening acoustic guitar strumming is a perfect segue from the last song. The wavering keyboard elements give an eerie feeling before David comes in with the vocals. The first verse speaks about someone on edge, always ready for the next opportunity. When the drums, bass, and electric guitar come in, we get a clearer picture of the subject of the song. This is someone who is stylish and charming, but also someone who lies and stabs people in the back. This is a dog. Following the verse, we get a brief instrumental section featuring a blistering guitar solo by David that's exceptionally supported by Nick Mason's drumming and the overall foreboding nature of Richard Wright's keyboard playing. The seemingly effortless way that David dances around the fretboard represents to me the cunningness of the type of people Roger considers dogs. This is them in action, hurting those around them to get to the top. As David sings the second verse, we learn that karma comes for the dog. As he gets older, things will only get harder and he will end up alone and ultimately die of cancer. After an uplifting instrumental section featuring Richard's mini moog, David comes in with a wailing guitar solo. The subtle and specific use of echo on David's vocals, this to me represents the paranoia of the dog. The bad deeds are catching up and the dog has to keep looking over his shoulder. The way Roger plays the bass in sort of a horse gallop gives the song a chasing feel, reinforcing the paranoia. For a minute, it seems like things are going to work out for the dog, but this moment is fleeting and the song becomes somber again with the sounds of a Fender Rhodes piano and barking dogs. Nick's bullet-like drum hits interrupts this section and we are greeted by another guitar solo by David. This time the tone is more biting, electric and drier with very little reverb. There are times when he truly makes the instrument talk and I see this as the dog crying out for help, but none is given. This gives way to the third verse where we find the dog character losing control and the bad deeds of his past are coming back to haunt him. It becomes a weight on his shoulders that only grows heavier with each passing year. After the last line, the word stone hangs in the air, becoming a repeating element, almost an alarm of sorts, a wake-up call, but it's too late. The next 4 minutes of music is a testament to Richard's immense talent, and it's a shame he wasn't given co-writing credit on this song. He carries this instrumental section with such gracefulness, it's hard not to sympathize with the dog character. I see his keyboards as representing the dog's moral compass, struggling to break through. Nick's drumming shouldn't be overlooked either, with his subtle bass drum hits reminiscent of a heartbeat. Overall, this quiet passage is like falling into despair. It's nebulous and lonely. The barking dogs return, but this time the audio is most likely processed by a vocoder and then fed through some sort of rotating speaker. This creates an unnatural, almost robotic feel to the barking, further showing the dog character is not in a good place. Whistling can be heard at one point, like an owner calling for the dogs to come home, but they don't listen as they continue to bark. This could be saying that there's no turning back for the dog character and he's stuck on his chosen path. The next verse is sung by Roger and he goes into the dog-eat-dog world of business. I find it interesting that he starts singing in the first person. I'm not really sure what this means. Maybe Roger is saying that he's a self-aware dog and he's trying to escape this world. In the last half of the verse, Roger changes back to the second person perspective and I see this as him criticizing the world of dogs. This is followed by another fierce guitar solo by David that ends with this genius descending augmented chord sequence. Soon after we get the final verse, which I interpret as a eulogy for the fallen subject of the song. Roger begins each line with "who was," giving the verse a bit of a prayer feel. Others have pointed out that this bears some resemblance to the poem Howl by Allen Ginsberg, which also criticized capitalism and oppression. It's not clear if Roger was thinking of this when he wrote this section, but the repetitive nature is very effective in showing how one can get caught up in a routine and end up becoming a dog without realizing it. The way the song ends, though, is just brutal, resolving on a not so happy tone with the dog dragged down by the stone. To me, this is a cautionary tale against becoming a dog. Roger is saying, continue to treat people inhumanely and you will die alone with the weight of your past hanging over you. Alright, flipping over to side 2, we have track 1, Pigs, 3 different ones. And this one opens with pig grunts made by a talk box guitar effect played by David. However, it's the striking keyboard arpeggio played by Richard that really sets the tone. This reminds me of classical music, and I see that as reflected of the upper crust of society, which plays perfectly into the theme of this song since it's about high-powered politicians and CEOs, or pigs. But the standout musical element to me is David's bass playing. His style is melodic and played with a lot of finesse. It's very different from Roger's. In fact, I'd argue that David's guitar playing throughout this song is more rhythmic to better support the bass. When Roger comes in for the first verse, his vocals have just the right amount of tension with a hint of echo as he sings about the first pig, which I believe is a business owner, CEO type. To me, this song's recurring lyric of "haha, charade you are" is the main argument against the pigs. In other words, their actions don't match their words and that it's all for show. Roger sees through their facade for who they really are, and to him, that's funny, but it's also tragic since these types of people are the ones running the world. And I have to give special mention to the use of cowbell by Nick. It really drives home the animal theme of the record. After a brief instrumental section, we get the second verse, and this pig is a bit harder to pinpoint, but many have interpreted the old hag in the lyrics as Margaret Thatcher. Regardless of who Roger had in mind when writing, this pig is a cold person, someone who is quick to violence and anger. Musically, this verse is very similar to the first, but one moment I especially like is how Roger draws out the S on the line "broken glass." After a series of instrumental sections, we get the first talk box guitar solo in Pink Floyd's history. It sounds dirty and twisted, but what I especially love is the restraint David shows while playing. His phrasing is methodical and purpose-driven, as if he's speaking an unknown language. He chooses not to fill this passage with his playing, but instead focuses on the overall effect. Around the 7-minute mark, we return to Richard's keyboard arpeggio from the beginning, but with a new bass line melody and some beautiful cymbal hits by Nick. There's also this breathy element that really adds to the intensity, leading us into the final verse. And this pig is directed at Mary Whitehouse, a conservative activist who sought to return Britain to more puritanical times. My favorite line is the quick succession of inhales. In that moment, Roger speaks volumes without saying a word. From the sinisterness of Mary to the gasping of air of her targets, to me, this is oppression. After this, we get another cowbell-infused instrumental section that leads us to where David really lets loose, not only with his bass playing, but his guitar is on fire, both biting and electric. It puts me on edge, and I see this as the oppressed fighting back against the pigs. This is the sheep rising up, taking back control, as evidenced by the music slowly fading out, revealing the sounds of an open field with sheep calls, and this leads us right into track 2, Sheep. Richard kicks off this song with a great solo on the Rhodes piano. It has sort of a groovy, playful quality, but underneath there's this bassy tone that's building in volume, almost like impending doom for the unaware sheep. Nick's drums quickly disperse the peaceful intro, and we get the first 2 lines sung by Roger. They quite literally describe what we just heard in the intro. The next 4 lines deal with the dogs being out to get the sheep and that things are not what they seem. Here, David's lead guitar is much higher in the mix as he lashes out with some great chords, and again, I take this to be symbolizing the dogs attacking the sheep. I see the second verse as a warning to the sheep that if they remain complacent and blindly follow the dogs, they're going to end up in cages or even the slaughterhouse. Roger's ultimate message is that if you don't heed this warning, it will be too late by the time you realize what's really going on. Musically, this is very similar to the first verse. However, this time David plays the lead guitar with an inflection that reminds me of a chicken, and I interpret this to be how the sheep are scared into submission. After this, we are greeted to a surreal, swirling instrumental section dominated by Richard's keyboards and David's thumping bass. It's also interesting to note that we hear the return of the repeating stone alarm from dogs. I'm not sure what this means. Maybe it's a warning call to the dogs, or maybe it's a sign that they're losing. Fast forwarding a bit, we get an instrumental reprise of the verse chord changes, and then things slow down again before we get to probably the most interesting part of the song. During this interlude, we can just barely make out a riff on Psalm 23:1. What I love about this is the robotic voice used on the left channel and the group of normal voices on the right. And in the middle, we hear sheep calling. I see this as programming the masses into loyal, docile sheep. I think Roger is saying how religion is used by those in power to control the people. We then transition to the final verse, and this is where the sheep rise up and take down the dogs. But even though the sheep are victorious, the final sentiment is that the sheep then become dogs themselves. The guitar here does this infectious descending chord progression that, along with the bass line, sounds like a victory march. This repeats over several measures, slowly fading out like a parade moving past, allowing the song to return to the peaceful nature sounds of birds and sheep calls. This blends seamlessly into the final song, Pigs on a Wing Part 2. In a slight contrast to Part 1, the guitar here is less rough and played with more confidence. It sounds fuller and louder, probably the result of an overdub of two guitars.
To bury my bones.
If in the first part Roger wonders what would happen without love, lyrically this part is an appreciation of that love, knowing that life would be that much harder without someone to share it with. In the end, I think Roger is saying that love conquers all and that the world could use a bit more love. What makes Animals so great is a combination of a simple, relatable concept, fantastic music that bucks traditional songwriting structure, and played by musicians in their creative prime. It's a study in less is more and making every note count. And despite it only having 4 songs, the record moves at a great clip. It's transportive and visceral. It's catchy, but also unnerving, and it never overstays its welcome. There's nothing else quite like this record, not even from Pink Floyd. They dared to do something different, something unexpected, and ended up creating one of the most harrowing and brutally honest records of 1977. Alright everyone, that will do it for today. Be sure to let me know what you think of Animals. Is it your favorite record by the band, or is there one you like more? I'm curious to know. Until then, I want to thank you all so much for watching, but I especially want to thank my members over on Patreon. I am your Vinyl Geek, and I'll catch you on the flip side. Thank you again for watching my review. Be sure to check out my Animals-inspired cocktail called Raving and Drooling, or any of my other Pink Floyd related content.